After learning of wife's affair, I destroyed her plans and served the divorce over dinner. After 15 years of marriage, one might believe they truly know their partner. I had been quite confident in my understanding of my wife, Laura. I thought I was familiar with her daily routines, her idiosyncrasies, and even her occasional mood swings, along with her midweek indulgences that often justified a shopping bag or two. However, an email I received on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday afternoon revealed a different reality. The subject line simply read about yesterday. I assumed it was one of those courteous reminders she sometimes sent, perhaps regarding a forgotten dry cleaning or a nudge to set out the trash cans for collection. Upon opening the email, I was struck by an unexpected wave of emotion. Initially, I could not identify it. Anger would come later, but this feeling was something more peculiar. The email was succinct, yet its implications were clear. She had addressed someone as darling and expressed gratitude for an incredible day. The message continued with a few personal details about missing their time together, and most tellingly, it concluded with "Your lady." The language was far too intimate, far too familiar, and that's when the realization hit me: Laura had not intended for me to receive this message. At first, I entertained the notion that it might be a prank, a bizarre mistake, or a poorly executed joke. I anticipated a follow-up email, perhaps an embarrassed correction, but it never arrived. The more I scrutinized the words, the more I confronted the harsh reality before me: Laura was involved in an affair. I found myself fixated on the screen, each line piercing deeper than the last. It felt like a scene from a film, an accidental email sent to the wrong recipient, a mundane technological error that inadvertently exposed a concealed betrayal. This was the kind of narrative I had encountered in novels, but living it was an entirely different experience. Once the initial shock subsided, I leaned back in my chair, surveying the office as if someone else might witness my world unraveling. It would have been simple to head to the nearest bar, to drown my anger and confront her with accusations until she had no option but to confess. Yet, that was not who I was anymore. I had come to understand early in my life that emotions often obscure rational thought. Confronting Laura without concrete evidence could lead to negative repercussions. She might either refute my claims or, worse, twist the narrative to portray me as the insecure one. Therefore, I resolved to approach the situation differently. If Laura intended to disrupt my life, I would ensure that the consequences were mutual. Reflecting on the past few months, I sought to identify any subtle signs that might have indicated her infidelity. Certainly, there were her late nights and numerous work meetings, but given her profession in real estate, known for its unpredictable hours, it was easy to dismiss these as mere occupational demands, especially when she returned home with a bright smile and tales of her day at showings. However, in hindsight, it became clear how oblivious I had been. While I remained at home each evening, quietly accepting her busy schedule, Laura was out showcasing properties, seemingly relishing more than just the open houses with an unidentified lover. I was determined not to allow her to perceive me as an unsuspecting fool any longer. I would approach this situation with caution, seeking to uncover who she was involved with, the duration of the affair, and the extent to which she would go to maintain this secret. The prospect of witnessing her discomfort and frantic attempts to cover her tracks was something I found worth anticipating. Taking a deep breath, I closed the email and returned to my work, feigning normalcy while a plan began to take shape in my mind. I would allow her to believe she had evaded detection, to continue her charade, but from that moment forward, every smile and every declaration of love would be a meticulously calculated element of my retribution. When Laura returned home that evening, I executed my plan flawlessly, maintaining a facade of normalcy and even inquiring about her day. I could sense her cheerful demeanor, almost radiant, and part of me was tempted to ask if she had encountered anyone intriguing the previous day, just to witness her reaction. However, I recognized that patience was essential. Instead, I smiled, nodded at all the appropriate moments, and proceeded with our nightly routine as if nothing had changed. That evening, as she peacefully fell asleep beside me, I remained wide awake, my mind a tempest of possibilities. Laura, blissfully oblivious, likely dreamt of her upcoming meeting, while I harbored my own intentions. I was determined to uncover every aspect of her hidden secret, right down to the last text message. When the moment was opportune, I would ensure her world crumbled just as she had shattered mine. The following day, I contacted a local detective agency seeking someone experienced in handling infidelity cases. It was a call I had dreaded making, one that left no room for uncertainty. I did not require their reassurance. I had already come to terms with what I had witnessed. However, I needed undeniable evidence, and I was prepared to pay any price to obtain it. The agency assured me they would commence tracking her movements immediately and provide daily updates. The process felt clinical, almost detached, which was precisely what I required. The emotions of anger and hurt were secondary. This was a matter of strategy. Revenge, when executed with precision, would be far more gratifying. The next day, Laura left for work with her customary cheerful farewell and a quick kiss on my cheek, completely unaware that her every move would be monitored. Soon, I would possess all the information necessary to confront her with the truth at a time, place, and manner of my choosing. As I observed her drive away, I recognized that this was merely the beginning of my plan. I had always envisioned detective agencies as the stuff of novels, featuring gritty characters in trench coats, uttering cliches in dimly lit rooms. In reality, it was a sterile office with a friendly receptionist who accepted my payment and assured me they would be in touch. There was none of the drama I had anticipated, but their promise of thoroughness was sufficient for my needs. The subsequent days passed in silence. To an outside observer, nothing had changed. I went to work, returned home, exchanged pleasantries with Laura, and endured her usual recounting of her exhausting day at the office. I found it challenging to suppress my laughter whenever she brought up meetings or clients, especially when she seemed fatigued. I reasoned that her exhaustion likely did not stem from showing houses. Eventually, I received the initial report from the detective, revealing that they had tracked her to a modest motel on the outskirts of town. She had checked in using her maiden name, which struck me with a surge of anger. She wasn't even using our last name. Then came the revelation that truly pierced my heart. She had not gone there alone. A man, slightly older than I, had accompanied her, dressed in business casual attire, the type one might expect to see on a golf course during a Saturday afternoon. The detective provided a photograph, a blurry image of him with his arm around her waist, while Laura looked up at him with a smile I had not seen in years. The man was identified as Greg Winters, a mid-level financial advisor residing just a few streets away. I recognized him vaguely. We had exchanged nods at neighborhood gatherings and engaged in small talk at the occasional backyard barbecue. I had never perceived anything remarkable about him, yet here he was, significant enough to transform my wife into someone I barely recognized. I spent hours scrutinizing that photograph, committing every detail of their body language to memory, the familiarity, the ease with which they interacted, Laura practically radiating joy as if they had not just entered a disreputable motel. I was torn between feelings of disgust, betrayal, and sheer foolishness. She had been conducting an affair practically in our own backyard, and I had been oblivious. I contacted the detective once more and, without hesitation, requested further information. I wanted to uncover everything: the duration of this affair, their meeting places, and how many client dinners had actually been covert meetings with Greg. The detective hesitated, suggesting that we had sufficient information, but I insisted, emphasizing my desire for every minute detail, no matter how trivial. I needed to grasp the entire situation, and the subsequent days proved to be revealing. Each night, I received updates that felt like a punch to the gut. For them, it had become a routine. The detective informed me that they met almost every Wednesday, slipping away from their homes to various locations, a park in a nearby town, a secluded beachside cafe, and most predictably, the shabby motel by the airport. It was as if they had created an entirely separate world, a parallel universe that existed just outside my own. To exacerbate my pain, they had developed a specific routine, seemingly perfected over months. I came across photographs of them laughing, walking hand in hand, their heads leaning close together. There was a familiarity in their interactions, the kind that I had believed was exclusive to our marriage. On the third day of surveillance, the detective presented me with a comprehensive report in a manila envelope, accompanied by a thumb drive. The drive contained video footage of them in the motel lobby, sharing a brief kiss and laughing before ascending the staircase. I did not watch the entire recording, only enough to confirm what I had already suspected. Greg was not merely a fleeting crush or a passing fancy, he was Laura's boyfriend. He was the man she had chosen over her devoted husband. Despite the anger this revelation stirred within me, my determination only grew stronger. If anything, this information simplified my plan. I had gathered all the necessary details, every piece of evidence, every meeting place, and every display of affection meticulously recorded and organized. Laura was evidently convinced that I would remain unaware indefinitely. She was prepared to jeopardize our marriage based on my perceived naivety. I, however, was more than ready to take advantage of that gamble. When the following Wednesday arrived, it required all my self-restraint not to confront them at the motel myself. I yearned to face them both immediately, to witness their expressions as they realized their deception had been uncovered. Yet, I refrained, understanding that it would be too simple for her to twist this into an innocent misunderstanding if I acted too soon. The execution had to be flawless. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on how much Laura had taken for granted. She likely believed I would never uncover her true nature. I recalled the small details, the anniversary dinners, her genuine surprise at the jewelry I had given her over the years, and her carefree laughter during our family gatherings. All of it was a facade, meticulously crafted to keep me complacent, and it had succeeded. I parked in the driveway and took a moment to steady myself. If I were to carry out my plan, I could not afford to let my composure falter. Upon entering the house, I greeted Laura as I typically would and placed a quick kiss on her cheek. She looked up, smiled, and for a fleeting instant, I thought I detected a hint of guilt, but it disappeared as swiftly as it had come. "Long day?" I inquired, maintaining a light tone. She sighed and nodded. "Yeah, another long one." That smile returned, a subtle trace of satisfaction lingering on her lips. I nodded in sympathy, concealing my disdain beneath a facade of mild curiosity. "I can imagine those late nights must really take a toll on you," I remarked, allowing the comment to linger as I assessed her reaction. Laura, however, did not falter. She merely shrugged, a quick dismissive gesture as if I had inquired about the weather. I observed her closely as she moved about the kitchen. Engaged in the preparations for dinner, she remained oblivious to the fact that her carefully organized client meetings had become transparent to me. As she recounted her day, I experienced a twinge of satisfaction, recognizing that she believed she had constructed a world where she could navigate freely, shielded from repercussions. However, that evening, as she nestled into bed beside me, she would soon discover the fragility of her illusion. I lay awake, burdened by the weight of the detective's findings, the photographs, videos, and timestamps, each serving as a damning piece of evidence against her deceit. The only task remaining was to determine how to wield this information. I understood the necessity of meticulous preparation, selecting each word and action with care. Merely exposing the affair would not suffice. I aimed to dismantle the entire facade she had created. I wanted her to experience the same disbelief, shock, and sense of powerlessness that I had endured. Thus, I maintained my facade as the unsuspecting husband, nodding in agreement whenever she spoke of her work, allowing her to believe that her life remained intact and that I was still ensnared in her web. She would never anticipate the truth. As I drifted into sleep, a singular thought crystallized in my mind. I would permit her to continue digging her own grave, and when she was ready to emerge, I would be there to reveal just how deep she had sunk. The following morning, after yet another night of pretending everything was normal, I resolved to investigate Greg Winters more thoroughly. I had the fundamental information from the detective's report, but I needed to understand the character of the individual who had so easily infiltrated my life. Greg and I were merely acquaintances. We exchanged nods at neighborhood gatherings and engaged in polite small talk when our paths crossed. However, he had never impressed me as someone extraordinary, just a financial advisor leading a perfectly ordinary suburban existence. It was disheartening to realize that he had exploited that familiarity to remain unnoticed by me. On a whim, I drove by his office that afternoon. It was a nondescript building in the downtown area, shared with other law offices and consulting firms. I had passed it before, but today it felt different, almost foreboding. I was struck by how mundane the lives of those who harm others can seem from the outside. This man likely went to work each day in a crisply pressed shirt, advising his clients on financial management with a calm, trustworthy smile that he had likely perfected over the years. A respectable family man, a financial advisor, someone on whom you could rely. That weekend, I unexpectedly encountered Greg at a barbecue hosted by our neighbor Ron. A small part of me wished he would make a mistake, revealing some trace of guilt, but he remained as composed as ever. We exchanged pleasantries, discussing yard maintenance and the neighborhood watch, all while Laura moved about nearby, completely unaware. It required immense restraint not to confront him on the spot. Instead, I concealed my fury behind a calm and polite demeanor. "I heard your wife is in real estate," he remarked casually, taking a sip of his beer. "Laura has always been friendly with my wife, Patty. It's nice that they have each other." I nodded, forcing a smile while gritting my teeth. "Yes, Laura keeps quite busy with long hours. I can hardly keep up." Greg nodded in sympathy, likely thinking he was safe right there, with our wives just a few yards away. It was almost laughable. "Perhaps we should organize a poker night sometime," he suggested, completely unaware that I knew he had been gambling with my marriage for months. The mere invitation made me want to laugh, but I maintained my composure and replied, "Sure, Greg, let's arrange it soon. I'll bring the drinks." If I had my way, he would soon be drinking to forget. Later that evening, back at home, I began to piece together my plan. Simply confronting Laura with the evidence would not suffice. That would merely provide her with an opportunity to devise excuses, apologies, and pleas for forgiveness. No, I wanted her to fully grasp the gravity of her actions, and not just in private. I intended for every aspect of her betrayal to haunt her in ways from which she could not escape. I positioned myself at the dining table, jotting down notes on a yellow legal pad. The first step was clear. I needed to create a rift between her and Greg, but this had to be executed discreetly to avoid raising suspicions. I concluded that the key was to instill doubts in Laura regarding Greg's dependability and worth, thereby eroding the idealized image she had constructed of him. The more uncertainties I could introduce, the simpler it would be to dismantle whatever illusion they believed they had. The following Wednesday, I found myself seated by the window at home, sipping coffee while awaiting Laura's departure for work. She exited around noon, adorned in her favorite black skirt and blouse, looking more polished than usual. It was somewhat ironic that she took such care to present herself for someone who would never see her in daylight. Once she left, I contacted the detective to request another round of surveillance to verify their whereabouts. The detective, understanding my intentions by this point, did not need to ask any questions. Later that afternoon, I received confirmation that Greg and Laura were once again at the motel, likely indulging in another blissful, guilt-free afternoon together. I drove to the location, parking a few blocks away. Their vehicles were parked side by side in the lot. I approached Laura's car, crouching beside the front tire, and used a small valve tool to release the air, listening to the soft hiss as her escape plan deflated. After completing the task, I calmly returned to my car and drove away without a second glance. As I waited at home, I pondered how long it would take for her to realize she was stranded. Would she call Greg for assistance, or would she turn to her dependable husband? Sure enough, about an hour later, my phone buzzed, and Laura's voice came through, breathless with what I presumed was a mix of exertion and frustration. "Jack, I am grateful for your assistance. My car has a flat tire." I maintained a light tone, suppressing a smirk. Her silence on the other end of the call conveyed much. "I'm near the airport," she responded awkwardly. I had a showing nearby. I ensured she could detect the skepticism in my voice as I replied, "Right. Don't worry, I'll be there in 20 minutes, I assured her. Upon my arrival, I noticed the surprise and anxiety reflected in her eyes. She likely hadn't anticipated my actual presence. To be fair, I doubt she expected me to be as meticulous as I was. I took my time changing the tire, deliberately prolonging the process to ensure it was secure, explaining each step in detail. By the time I completed the task, Greg had probably already departed, and Laura was anxiously glancing at her watch. "All done," I announced, wiping my hands and offering her a reassuring smile. "You're good to go." "Thank you, Jack," she replied, attempting to keep her voice steady, though I could sense the underlying tension. She avoided my gaze, nervously fiddling with her keys. "No problem," I responded, relieved that I was nearby to assist. "What a coincidence, right?" Laura managed a tight-lipped smile, and I recognized that I had left her with lingering doubts, a question mark that would resonate in the quiet moments that followed. The next time she contemplated the idea of slipping away, she would have to consider whether I would appear again, and that was merely the beginning. Over the following days, I meticulously outlined the next phase of my strategy, ensuring that she remained uncertain. I intentionally returned home earlier, prepared dinner, and tidied up the house, providing her with no reason to suspect that I was onto her. I even surprised her with a lavish bouquet of flowers at her office, which completely took her by surprise. "You didn't have to do that," she remarked that evening, offering a smile that I would have believed to be sincere had I not been aware of the truth. "Why not?" I replied with a casual shrug. "I just wanted to show you how much I value you." For a brief moment, her smile faltered, and I detected a hint of guilt in her eyes, but she quickly regained her composure, murmuring a thank you as she placed the card into her purse. By the end of that week, it was evident that my actions were having an impact. Laura appeared more tense than usual, increasingly withdrawn, as if she were anticipating an inevitable revelation. I made it a point to observe her closely, noting the subtle changes in her behavior, the way she hesitated before responding to questions and the way she glanced at her phone, as if expecting something to occur. For the time being, I was satisfied to keep her in suspense. With each act of kindness, each lingering embrace, and gentle smile, I was tightening the noose, ensuring that when the moment arrived, she would fully comprehend the extent to which she had been manipulated, and I was certain that once she realized, there would be no escape for her. The more I observed Laura, the more intriguing her reactions became. It resembled watching a child attempting to conceal a falsehood. Each movement was just a touch too cautious, and every smile appeared slightly forced. She likely believed she was successfully masking her anxiety, yet I perceived everything, and it was unfolding perfectly. As Wednesday arrived, I positioned myself by the window in our living room, feigning interest in a book while, in truth, I was monitoring her car as it exited the driveway. She wore a navy blue dress that I had gifted her last Christmas, her hair elegantly pinned up, presenting herself as if she were about to meet a significant client. In a sense, she indeed was. I observed her vehicle vanish around the corner before I picked up my phone to make a brief call to the detective agency. They had already verified her meeting with Greg for that day, but I sought more than mere photographs. I required them to investigate further, to follow her inside and document everything. The individual on the other end assured me he would make the necessary arrangements, albeit for an additional fee. "Money is no object," I responded, "just ensure I receive all the information." Earlier that morning, I had contacted the motel where their meeting was scheduled, posing as someone needing to book a room for a business trip. The manager was eager to assist and provided me with all the pertinent details, including the name of the receptionist on duty and the ease with which their computer system could be accessed with the right incentive. A little extra cash persuaded him to allow the detective to install a discreet hidden camera in the room reserved by Laura and Greg. This setup would be temporary, of course, just sufficient to capture their clandestine affair in high definition. That evening, after yet another night of maintaining the facade of normalcy, I received the footage in a secure online file from the detective agency. I poured myself a drink, settled into my chair at the computer, and clicked on the video. There they were, sitting closely together, engaged in an intimate conversation as if they were the only two individuals in existence. Greg was laughing, his hand resting on her knee, while Laura looked at him with an expression I had not witnessed in years. They appeared genuinely happy, so at ease with one another that it was almost painful to observe. However, it was the way she gazed at him that hurt the most, that soft, adoring look she once reserved solely for me. I allowed the video to continue, capturing moments I knew would hold significance later. There was something profoundly satisfying about watching them, completely unaware of the camera, oblivious to the fact that their little world was being recorded. Each glance, each touch, each whisper served as a piece of ammunition that would prove useful in due time. When Laura returned home that evening, she greeted me with her customary warmth, a slight smile gracing her lips. I found myself wondering if she realized how transparent she had become, how every gesture betrayed her. She attempted to maintain a facade of normalcy, inquiring about my day and mentioning vague details about hers. It almost amused me how she neglected to provide specifics, relying on the assumption that I remained as oblivious as ever. I returned her smile, nodded, and engaged in small talk. "You've been busy lately," I remarked casually, observing her reaction closely. She hesitated for just a moment too long before forcing a quick smile. "Yeah, real estate's like that sometimes, feast or famine, right?" I replied, feigning interest in a magazine. "Well, I hope your client appreciates all the hard work you're putting in." I thought I detected a flicker of guilt in her expression, but she swiftly masked it, dismissing my comment with a laugh. I chose to let it slide, fully aware that every word and glance was merely adding fuel to the fire I was building beneath her. By the conclusion of that week, I resolved it was necessary to intensify my efforts. I aimed to create a rift between her and EGO, illustrating that her seemingly flawless fantasy was beginning to unravel. I could perceive her growing discomfort in my presence. She appeared restless and distracted, likely contemplating whether she had overstepped her bounds. This tension presented an ideal opportunity for my next maneuver. On Saturday morning, I visited a florist and ordered an extravagant bouquet of roses, her favorite. I ensured they would be delivered directly to her office, accompanied by a handwritten note that read, "For my one and only, forever yours, Jack." That evening, she returned home with the bouquet in her arms, smiling yet evidently on edge. She placed the flowers on the counter and embraced me, her tone overly appreciative as she remarked, "You didn't have to do this." I responded with a composed smile, stating, "I merely wanted to remind you of how much I value you. It has been a hectic few months for both of us." She gazed at me for a moment longer than necessary, as if searching my expression for something. Perhaps she was questioning whether I was aware of her situation or feeling a hint of guilt. Regardless, her reaction was worth every penny spent. As the days progressed, I observed her checking her phone with increasing frequency, texting with a slight frown, indicating that something was troubling her. It wasn't long before I intercepted a message exchanged between her and Greg. My strategy of using flowers and affection had successfully infiltrated their relationship, revealing fractures in her seemingly perfect affair. She texted him, "Can't talk much, Jack's being really attentive. I might have to lay low for a while." Greg's response was a disgruntled reply, clearly irritated by the disruption. I couldn't suppress a sense of smug satisfaction. I allowed him to remain in his own thoughts, believing this was merely the beginning of the situation, yet I was far from finished. On Wednesday, I took the initiative to cancel the motel reservation that had been arranged. I called under Greg's name, requesting the release of the room due to an emergency, and then calmly ended the call. When Wednesday arrived, Laura left for her usual showing, and I observed her departure, fully aware of her destination and the surprise that awaited her upon discovering there was no room reserved. I envisioned her expression, the irritation, and the mental gymnastics she would have to perform, perhaps questioning whether Greg had made an error. That evening, Laura returned home in a noticeably foul mood, her usual cheer absent. She dropped her bag with a sigh and avoided my gaze, mumbling something vague about a long day. "It must have been quite the show," I remarked, suppressing a smile. She shot me a fleeting glance, one that seemed almost suspicious, yet not enough to confront me directly. I watched her closely, noting how she struggled to meet my eyes and how her responses became terse and defensive. She was beginning to unravel. After dinner, I proposed watching a movie and deliberately sat close, placing her feet on my lap and offering her the kind of attention she likely thought I had forgotten. She appeared taken aback, her glances uncertain as if she were attempting to assess my motives. Nevertheless, I maintained my composure, playing the role of the attentive and loving husband. The following day, I intercepted another text. "I don't know what's going on with Jack lately. He's different, and it's unsettling." Greg's response was predictably self-absorbed. "It's probably just a phase. Let's meet on Friday instead." The simplicity of his reply brought a smile to my face. He believed he was in command, capable of manipulating her like a marionette. However, I had taken control and had no intention of relinquishing it. On Friday, they planned to meet at a new hotel, the Hyatt downtown. I swiftly made a call, posing as Greg, to cancel their reservation. I anticipated their arrival, only to find themselves without accommodation, and I could almost envision the irritated expression on Greg's face when Laura returned home that evening. She appeared more than just shaken, moving through the house in a daze, clearly frustrated. As she ascended to bed, she cast me a glance that was both inquisitive and apprehensive. I locked eyes with her for a moment, allowing her to ponder the extent of my knowledge. I sensed the power dynamic shifting, tilting in my favor with each passing day. The walls were closing in on her, and she was acutely aware of it, yet I was not prepared to release her from this predicament. No, my plans were just beginning, for this was not merely about ending the affair, it was about reclaiming what she had taken from me, piece by piece. When I was finished, she would fully comprehend the magnitude of her loss. By the following week, I could observe Laura beginning to unravel. Her once casual glances at her phone had transformed into anxious checks every few minutes, as if she were awaiting a message to soothe her nerves. She had started to avoid eye contact and seemed distracted, struggling to maintain a conversation with me and her clients. Her dinners with Greg were becoming shorter and less frequent, as he appeared to be losing patience. Their meetings had diminished, partly due to my meticulous orchestration of a series of minor yet relentless disruptions. Each disruption seemed insignificant on its own, but I understood that they were cumulatively creating fractures in the illusion Laura and Greg had built. With every act of sabotage and every foiled plan, those fractures were widening. This past Wednesday, I conceived the idea of orchestrating a more public scenario for Greg and Laura. If they intended to engage in their little affair around town, I would ensure they had an audience. From intercepting Laura's messages, I learned that she and Greg had arranged to meet at a park approximately 20 miles outside the city, away from any prying eyes. Consequently, I decided to drive there myself, parking in the same lot while remaining out of sight. I observed as they arrived, with Greg's arm casually draped around Laura's waist as they walked toward the trails, resembling any affectionate couple. Had I not been aware of their true intentions, I might have mistaken them for two lovebirds enjoying a midweek picnic. Once they ventured down the trail, I approached Greg's vehicle and discreetly placed several sticky notes on his windows, each inscribed with the message, "Someone is watching you." This subtle gesture was designed to strike a chord. Upon their return, he would have to remove each note, instilling a sense of paranoia that their clandestine activities were not as private as they believed. That evening, I intercepted a message from Greg to Laura expressing concern about the risks involved, suggesting they exercise greater caution. Laura's reply was filled with desperation, even bordering on pitiful, as she pleaded, "Please don't say that, I don't want to stop seeing you." It was gratifying to witness her anxiety, fully aware that she was grappling with the consequences of my actions. I could almost sense the fear emanating from their texts as they scrambled to devise a plan to continue their affair. However, my intentions were far from complete. This was merely the beginning of their unraveling. The following day, I initiated my next strategy, this time focusing directly on Laura. I had arranged for her sister, Megan, to make a surprise visit over the weekend. Given their close relationship and the infrequency of Megan's visits, I called her on Wednesday evening, adopting the role of the considerate husband, and casually mentioned that Laura would be delighted to have her stay for an extended weekend. Megan consented without a moment's thought, unaware of the turmoil I was about to unleash. On Friday morning, as Laura prepared to leave for a meeting, I casually dropped the news. "By the way, your sister is coming into town this weekend," I mentioned over breakfast, maintaining a nonchalant demeanor. "She plans to stay here until Sunday." Laura halted, her coffee cup suspended mid-air, clearly taken aback. This weekend, she stammered, visibly unsettled. Yes, she called yesterday. I thought it would be a pleasant surprise, I replied, my smile concealing my true intentions. I could see the wheels turning in her mind as she quickly realized that her plans with Greg would need to be postponed once more. She managed a smile, uttering something about how lovely it would be to spend time with her sister, but I recognized the underlying fury masked by her polite facade. This was precisely the reaction I sought. As if on cue, Megan arrived that afternoon, brimming with enthusiasm and entirely unaware of the tension her visit was creating. Laura was compelled to play the role of the gracious host, smiling and engaging in conversation while struggling to suppress her frustration. At one point, when Laura stepped away to take a call, I caught a glimpse of her on the patio, speaking in hushed tones to Greg. She had been attempting to reach him since the morning to rearrange their plans, but he had remained unresponsive, likely just as annoyed as she was. I observed her pacing, her voice dropping to a near-desperate whisper. "It's just one weekend, Greg," I heard her say. "I can't just tell her to leave." I watched as her shoulders sagged in resignation, and she nodded before ending the call, her expression a blend of anger and disappointment. Meanwhile, Megan was her usual exuberant self, and I played my role as the devoted husband, preparing a lavish dinner, keeping the conversation light, and noting how Laura's discomfort intensified with each passing hour. It was evident that she could not relax, her mind preoccupied with the disintegration of her plans right before her eyes. The following morning, I decided to escalate my efforts. Having spent several days experimenting with Laura's phone to find a method to disable it at critical moments, today marked my first significant trial. I replaced her phone battery with a non-functional one and waited, fully aware that when she inevitably attempted to reach Greg, she would discover her phone was inoperable. As anticipated, around mid-morning, she descended the stairs, visibly frustrated and clutching her unresponsive device. She muttered about needing to charge it, and I felt a sense of satisfaction as her plans to contact Greg fell apart. "You can use the landline," I suggested, concealing my smirk. She dismissed my offer with a wave. "It's fine, I'll charge it later," she replied curtly, clearly annoyed but trying to maintain her composure in front of Megan. Throughout that weekend, Laura found herself unable to reach Greg, compelled to maintain a facade for her sister. Meanwhile, Megan was blissfully unaware of the turmoil she had inadvertently contributed to. As the weekend progressed, I observed Laura becoming increasingly agitated, her smiles appeared forced, and her laughter lacked authenticity. On Sunday evening, after Megan finally departed, I discovered Laura in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, her expression a mix of exhaustion and frustration. "Tough weekend?" I inquired lightly, observing her closely. She shot me a look that was part exasperation, part defeat. "Just busy," she replied, struggling to meet my gaze. I offered her a sympathetic nod, my tone laced with feigned innocence. "Well, I'm glad Megan could visit. You two don't see each other often enough." Yeah, it was nice," she said, her voice lacking any real conviction. I could see the cracks beginning to show, her patience wearing thin. She was ensnared in a game she was unaware she was playing, and I relished every moment of it. Later that night, after she had gone to bed, I reviewed the landline recording, my little safeguard in case she attempted to call Greg from the house phone. As expected, I found a call from Sunday morning at 7 a.m. The conversation was brief yet revealing, with Laura expressing her frustration and disappointment regarding her sister's unexpected visit. Greg, however, appeared dismissive, brushing aside her apologies with an impatient tone. "This is getting too complicated," he remarked sharply. "Maybe it's just not worth it." Laura's response was filled with desperation, almost pleading. "Please don't say that. I'll make it up to you, I promise. Just give me a little more time." She saved the recording, knowing it would prove useful later. Greg's patience was evidently wearing thin, and Laura began to panic, desperately trying to maintain control over the fragments of her affair. The following Monday, I intercepted another text from Greg. "I'm not sure we should keep doing this. It's getting too risky, and your husband seems different." Laura's reply was frantic, a stark departure from her usual composed demeanor. Please don't end this. It's just a rough patch. I can make it work, I promise. Greg's response was curt, almost cold. I'll think about it. Laura's once ideal affair was slipping away, and I observed as each piece fell apart. The fantasy she had constructed was turning to ash, and she remained oblivious to the fact that I was the one igniting the flames. When she returned home that evening, I deliberately sat beside her on the couch and turned on her favorite show. She glanced at me, slightly surprised, as if noticing me for the first time. You know, I said casually, I really am grateful for you, Laura. She blinked, caught off guard by the sincerity in my voice. Thank you, Jack, she replied hesitantly, her face flushing slightly. I leaned over and kissed her on the cheek, observing as she shifted uncomfortably, a flicker of guilt crossing her expression. She was beginning to sense that something was amiss, that the ground beneath her was shifting, yet she still had not connected the dots. She believed she was the one in control, but I understood it was merely a matter of time. Her affair was hanging by a thread, and soon enough, I would be there to sever it. At this point, Laura was engulfed in a perpetual state of anxiety. Her once meticulously managed double life was beginning to unravel, and I could perceive the burden of it in every fleeting glance, every exasperated sigh, and every anxious check of her phone. Greg was becoming increasingly distant. Their once thrilling affair was now strained by my carefully orchestrated interruptions, and Laura was desperately attempting to maintain her composure. I recognized that it was time to escalate the situation. The following Wednesday, Laura scheduled another meeting with Greg, resolute in her efforts to salvage their relationship. She believed she was being discreet, communicating through hurried, coded messages. However, due to the email forwarding system I had established on her laptop, every detail of their upcoming encounter was delivered directly to me. They had decided to meet at a different hotel this time, a more upscale venue downtown, the Hyatt. She seemed to think that a change of location would alleviate the tension, as if a new setting could mend their deteriorating affair. I resolved to ensure that it would be an unforgettable evening for her. That morning, I contacted the Hyatt under Greg's name and canceled their reservation. I could vividly imagine Laura and Greg arriving, only to be informed at the front desk that their room was no longer available. However, my intentions extended beyond merely canceling their reservation. I aimed to heighten the drama, illustrating to Laura that her idealized fantasy was morphing into an inescapable nightmare. On the evening of their planned meeting, I made a reservation at the Hyatt restaurant. Dressed in my finest suit, I arrived just in time to observe Laura and Greg entering the lobby below, exchanging confused and irritated glances as they conversed with the receptionist. I noticed Greg gesturing animatedly, clearly frustrated, while Laura appeared helpless, her eyes scanning the area, likely searching for a way to salvage the evening. After witnessing their unsuccessful check-in from a distance, I proceeded to the restaurant and took a seat at a table with a clear view of the lobby. As I sipped my wine, I watched them step away from the front desk, visibly upset. Greg was walking back and forth, frequently checking his phone, undoubtedly searching for nearby hotels, but it appeared they were all fully booked. Laura's shoulders drooped as she quietly suggested they call it a night. I could sense her frustration, yet the disappointment etched on Greg's face was even more gratifying than I had anticipated. He seemed on the verge of leaving her right then and there. I lingered at the restaurant longer than necessary, relishing the moment and the realization that I had introduced yet another fissure into their so-called relationship. By the time I returned home, I was already eager to witness their messages unfold in real time. Sure enough, by morning, I intercepted an email exchange that painted a rather satisfying picture. Greg was irate, questioning why she hadn't confirmed the room, his impatience evident in his words. Laura's reply was frantic and defensive, insisting she thought he had taken care of it and asserting it was not her fault. Throughout the day, they exchanged several more messages, each one increasingly tense and accusatory, revealing the growing strain between them. I observed as their idealized fantasy, the meticulously crafted getaway they had envisioned, began to disintegrate under the burden of distrust and frustration. Yet, I was not finished. With the Hyatt incident still fresh in their minds, I decided to introduce another layer of turmoil into their lives. That Friday, I contacted Greg's office, pretending to be a concerned friend of his wife. I insinuated that he had been seen with another woman and suggested that his behavior warranted scrutiny. This was sufficient to sow a seed of suspicion, ensuring that his wife would be more vigilant regarding his actions from that point forward. I wanted him to experience the same sense of paranoia and anxiety. Laura had been living with the tension of my plan for weeks, and the final component was set to unfold later that week. While monitoring Laura's emails, I discovered that she and Greg were attempting to arrange a last-ditch meeting, this time at Greg's lake house, far removed from the city and any familiar surroundings. It was evident that they both recognized this as their final opportunity to salvage whatever remained of their affair. However, I was determined to prevent them from enjoying their little escape. On Saturday morning, I casually informed Laura that I would be skipping my usual golf game, explaining that I had promised her sister, Megan, we would spend the day together. I observed her expression change as she processed this information. Her initial surprise quickly morphed into visible frustration. She had been relying on my absence to facilitate her rendezvous with Greg, and now that avenue was obstructed. "Oh, I thought you had golf today," she remarked, forcing a smile. "Yeah, I decided to switch things up. Besides, Megan was looking forward to seeing us," I replied, feigning nonchalance while noting her clenched jaw and the strained smile she attempted to maintain. Just as Laura began to search for a new excuse, the doorbell rang. Megan had arrived. As Laura welcomed her, I could see the suppressed irritation in her eyes. She was compelled to play the hostess for her sister while I maintained the role of the dutiful husband, perfectly composed and in control. After breakfast, I took Megan aside and proposed a visit to a nearby vineyard, which thrilled her. Laura had no choice but to comply, her opportunity with Greg slipping further away. As we wandered through the vineyard, Laura fell silent, her phone stowed away as she endeavored to maintain appearances. It was clear she was seething internally, frustrated by yet another thwarted plan. Meanwhile, Megan remained blissfully unaware, chatting about work, her recent vacation, and how fortunate Laura was to have such a kind and thoughtful husband. I noticed a flicker of guilt cross Laura's face at Megan's comment. Her gaze was cast downward, deliberately avoiding both of our eyes, and I could sense the burden she carried. The delicate facade she had constructed was unraveling with each moment she remained distant from Greg. However, the true revelation came that night when I reviewed the landline recording once more. There it was, a call from Laura to Greg, her voice strained as she apologized yet again for the misunderstanding. "I don't know what's happening," she murmured into the phone. "Jack has just been different lately. It feels like he's watching me." Greg's reply was dismissive, urging her to remain composed. "You're being paranoid, Laura. Just keep it together, all right?" Their conversation escalated into a tense argument, both voices weary and fraught with frustration. Greg's impatience with the constant rescheduling was evident, while Laura appeared on the verge of a breakdown. Their once enchanting fantasy had transformed into a burden, a ticking time bomb poised to detonate. The following day, I received a final email from Greg, clear, decisive, and damning. "Laura, this isn't working. I think it's best we create some distance. This situation has become overwhelming." In an instant, the illusion crumbled. Laura's clandestine affair, the life she had meticulously concealed, was reduced to a series of emails, a canceled hotel reservation, and a stark dismissal. I observed her expression fall as she read Greg's message, the weight of her loss settling heavily upon her. That evening, she sat silently on the couch, her gaze vacant and her demeanor hollow. I joined her, feigning ignorance to her sorrow, pretending to be the supportive, loving husband she had chosen to betray. "Are you all right?" I inquired gently, masking my true feelings. She nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just a rough day." I nodded in response, and she leaned into my shoulder, seeking comfort she no longer deserved. Yet, I did not mind. It was precisely where I wanted her, alone, vulnerable, and acutely aware of what she had sacrificed. I sat beside her, a small, satisfied smile gracing my lips as I held her close, fully aware that everything was falling into place. The sense of fulfillment I experienced as I observed Laura disintegrate in silence was profound. Every element was precisely aligned, leaving her to grasp the remnants of a relationship she had believed to be invulnerable. For weeks, I had meticulously constructed each layer, watching her world sway and falter. With Greg no longer in the picture, she found herself with no escape route. However, my intentions were far from complete. If anything, I was merely beginning. While Greg's final correspondence may have concluded her affair, it was time to unveil the truth, ensuring she comprehended the extent of her betrayal. That weekend, I devoted myself to careful preparations, orchestrating the final phase of my scheme. I envisioned the confrontation as a gradual build-up, a moment she would never forget. Thus, I made a reservation at an upscale restaurant she had always cherished, a venue we had not frequented in years. I was aware that this would catch her off guard. Laura was already on shaky ground, her usual vibrancy diminished. An elegant evening out would thrust her into an emotional labyrinth, and I would be there to trigger every response. On Monday morning, I arranged for the delivery of 2 pristine white envelopes, one addressed to Greg's wife, Patty, and the other to Laura's sister, Megan. Each envelope contained copies of the detective's photographs, intercepted messages, and a note that outlined the affair with a chilling clarity that left no room for misinterpretation. I aimed for everyone close to Laura to be informed of the truth. If she believed she had successfully concealed her actions, she was about to discover just how mistaken she was. That evening, I assumed the role of the devoted husband, returning home early with flowers and surprising her with the dinner reservation. Laura regarded me with a blend of astonishment and skepticism, as if questioning whether this was some sort of test. Nevertheless, she did not object. She donned a dress she had not worn in years, applied her makeup with care, and offered me a strained, uncertain smile that resembled more of a facade than a genuine expression. During the drive, I maintained a lighthearted conversation, inquiring about her day and engaging in casual banter, as if it were an ordinary evening. I wished for her to entertain the thought, even if just for a fleeting moment, that she had managed to escape, that perhaps life could revert to its former state. I wanted her to cling to that illusion for a few more minutes. Upon our arrival at the restaurant, I had arranged for us to be seated in a secluded booth by the window, where the city lights sparkled outside, casting reflections on the glass and silverware. Laura remained quiet, her gaze wandering anxiously, as if she anticipated some significant revelation. I observed her, relishing the tension in the air, before pouring us each a glass of wine. "I have missed evenings like this," I remarked, leaning back in a relaxed manner. "It has been quite some time since we truly went out." She nodded, offering a small, tight-lipped smile. "Yes, it's nice, really nice." I could perceive the uncertainty in her eyes, the way she seemed to struggle with each word. She was making a concerted effort to unwind, yet the expression on her face indicated that she could not dispel the sense that something was amiss. After we placed our orders, I observed her intently, savoring every hint of discomfort that flickered across her features. By the time our entrees arrived, she was glancing at her phone, as if hoping for an interruption that would provide her an escape. Nevertheless, I maintained the flow of conversation, inquiring about her recent work projects and sharing amusing anecdotes about our neighbors. Each question was designed to engage her, to create a sense of normalcy. Finally, as dessert was served, I leaned in, locking my gaze with hers. "Laura," I said softly, setting my wine glass down, "there is something I wish to discuss with you." Her complexion drained of color, and she forced a smile, clearly uneasy. "Oh, what is it?" I took a deep breath, holding her gaze and allowing the silence to envelop us. "You know," I began, "I have been reflecting a great deal on us lately, on how much I value everything we have shared." She swallowed hard, her eyes darting to the side. I raised my hand to halt her, reassuring her, "It's all right, Laura, you need not say anything. Over the past few months, I have observed you closely and have come to understand many things." I reached into my pocket and retrieved a small envelope, sliding it across the table toward her. She gazed at it, her expression a blend of confusion and fear. "What is this?" she asked. "Go ahead," I replied calmly, watching her as she opened it. Inside, she discovered the photographs, the ones from the detective, each serving as a fragment of the puzzle she believed she had concealed so effectively. The images depicted her with Greg at the motel, in the park, and in the parking lot, laughing and smiling as if they were the only two in the world. Her hand shook as she held the photos, her complexion draining of color, her mouth parting in a silent gasp. "Jack, I leaned back, maintaining a neutral expression. "I know, Laura. I am aware of everything, the lies, the meetings, the late nights. I know it all." Tears welled in her eyes as she reached across the table, attempting to grasp my hand. "Please, let me explain." I withdrew my hand, my voice icy. "What is there to explain, Laura? You had a choice, and you made it. You chose him. You chose to betray everything we built together." She stuttered, her voice breaking. "Jack, I'm so sorry." I was confused. I interrupted her, my tone low and controlled. "Do not insult me. You were fully aware when you sneaked around, sent texts, and hid hotel reservations. You knew precisely what you were doing." Tears streamed down her face as she covered her mouth, trying to suppress a sob. "Please, Jack, it didn't mean anything. It was a mistake. I was weak, but I love you. I truly do." I laughed, the sound cold and hollow. "You believe you love me, Laura? No, you loved the thrill of having your cake and eating it too. You relished the excitement of deceit, of having something on the side. You did not love me." She remained seated, trembling, her shoulders hunched and her complexion devoid of color. I allowed her to sit in silence, letting each word resonate and allowing her to grasp the gravity of her actions. Then, with a subtle smile, I signaled to the waiter. Laura's brows knitted together in confusion, her tear-filled eyes flickering toward me in search of understanding. It was then that she noticed him, the waiter, approaching with a silver tray, moving with deliberate and practiced elegance. Atop the tray rested a single white envelope, the divorce papers. As the waiter drew near, stopping beside her with a professional nod, Laura's expression turned pale. She glanced at me, her eyes wide with dread, then back to the envelope as if it were a venomous object she feared to touch. "Sir," the waiter said, extending the tray with a respectful bow, as requested. "Thank you," I replied, offering him a calm nod before turning my attention back to Laura. I gestured toward the tray. "It's for you." Slowly, she reached out, her fingers trembling as she grasped the envelope. Her breath caught in her throat upon seeing her name inscribed on the front. The weight of the moment struck her like a blow, her lips parting in silent disbelief as she opened it and extracted the divorce papers within. Each page was crisp, every line meticulously outlined, awaiting her signature. She looked up at me, her eyes brimming with fresh tears, her voice barely a whisper. "Jack, please, no. Don't do this." I leaned back, my expression resolute. "It's already done, Laura," I replied coldly. "You made this decision, I am merely finalizing it." Her mouth opened as if to protest, but no words emerged. She simply stared down at the papers, her face a mask of anguish as she comprehended the irrevocability of the situation. The waiter, observing the unfolding scene, gave a quiet nod and stepped back, maintaining his composure as if he had merely served dessert. "It's over, Laura," I continued, my tone low and unyielding. "Greg doesn't want you. You have shattered our marriage for a man who has already moved on. Now, you must confront the consequences of your decisions." She completely broke down, her shoulders trembling as her quiet sobs echoed her despair, struggling to maintain her composure while clutching the documents. In that once beloved elegant restaurant, she found herself ensnared, her shame and regret laid bare for all to witness. I observed her without a trace of compassion, only a sense of cool satisfaction. I had provided her with every chance to be honest, to reveal the truth, yet she opted for her illusion. Now, I was finished, and she had to confront reality. After several agonizing moments, I rose and placed a few bills on the table to settle the bill. She looked up at me, her eyes red and pleading, but I felt nothing, her entreaties went unheard as I turned and exited, leaving her alone at that table with the wreckage of her decisions. That night, as I packed my belongings, an unexpected sense of relief washed over me. The anger, betrayal, and pain had all been consumed, replaced by a calm, steady satisfaction. The door clicked shut behind me with a gratifying finality, a sound I had long awaited. The drive to my temporary apartment was enveloped in silence, a lengthy pause that allowed me to reflect on everything that had transpired. The divorce would soon be public knowledge if it wasn't already. I had ensured that Laura's family and Greg's wife, Patty, were informed of the truth. Patty had received her own set of documents from me, meticulously outlining every affair, every meeting, every act of betrayal her husband had engaged in with Laura. Upon arriving at the apartment, the key felt cold in my hand, a small yet gratifying reminder that this marked the beginning of a new chapter. That evening, while unpacking a final box, I stumbled upon a small leather-bound notebook containing a passage I had written the night before our ultimate confrontation: "No one harms me without facing consequences."